I'm here to warn you about the worst SSD enclosure I've ever used. This piece of shit almost fried my SSD. I had a Samsung 990 Pro that I decided to use with this Orico, I hope I'm saying it right, with this Orico SSD enclosure for M.2s. It claims that it can do Thunderbolt 4 and that it'll, be super fast, and they talk all about the cooling and how good it is with the fan. It's got 2 heat sinks. So let me show you a little bit about why this product sucks. So we pull it out, and the first thing we see is our user manual, the heatsink, which I had a thermal pad in, our actual enclosure. They include a nice little 40 gigabit cable. It's just a standard cable, other else than the fast data transfer. Nothing special about it, probably 60 or 100 watts. And then they include an extra thermal pad and the small. So pulling the enclosure out here, just slides right off. First of all, this is the cheapest plastic I think I've ever felt. I have little points that go into the enclosure to hold your drive. So thanks to Brad here for providing me with an extra mic. I just want to show you guys how this sounds, just when I use it. So it's okay, like when it's just apart, but as soon as it's together, it's just like the latching mechanism is just terrible. How's that picking up over the, yeah. So anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and shut this mic off. So we open up the enclosure here, and we have where we would put our M.2 in, so right there. And then we have this tiny little fan, and then if you take these, I'm not really sure what you want to call these little plastic holders. They replace the screws for the SSD basically, but it seems like a really good design at first, and I really liked this SSD enclosure just because of the way it looks. I liked the transparent design. I even got the blue heatsink here. I really liked it. I was just really disappointed with the actual performance. Sorry if this video seems a little bit choppy. I'm just really disappointed with the product. I actually ended up having to go with something else, which I'll show you later. But basically, you put your SSD in, you pop this on your SSD goes in, and then you just turn it, and then that locks it. So not a bad design there. But when we look at the actual cooling aspects of this, first of all, the fan only spins at what sounds and feels like 100, maybe 200 RPMs, which I get that they're trying to be, they're trying to keep it quiet. It's actually mentioned on the box, I believe, or at least it is in the listing about how quiet the fan is, but there's no point in having a fan if it doesn't actually do anything. So if you look closely here, there's this small, very, very, very small intake port right here. I'm not sure if you guys can see that or not. Try the other camera maybe. Very small intake that pulls the heat off the SSD, and then it vents it out this way. Vents it out right there. But the problem is it doesn't spin fast enough to actually move out any air. So you have your SSD in here, and especially with me being a filmmaker wanting to use a 990 Pro that'll do speeds of up to 7 gigabytes per second with a limitation of about 3.3 gigabytes per second over Thunderbolt 4, you're gonna generate a lot of heat. So you need a sufficient cooling system. So basically you put the SSD in, you take this heatsink with the thermal pad, you place it over top, it kind of clicks down, and then you take the top of your case, and then it snaps on, like that. But one problem here. See, for this to even be efficient, I just got it stuck. For this to even be efficient, these two heat sinks need to touch. They don't. So you actually have a gap when the top of this case is on. It actually has a gap in between where the heat sinks don't touch at all. There's way too much space in here. And because of how much space there is in here, the fan does nothing. If it was smaller, maybe all touching together, then it would do something, because there's supposed to be an intake over this way. That is supposed to be an intake so that it can pull the air through there and then pour it out over here. But again, doesn't work really well. This video is just supposed to serve as a warning, really. I honestly didn't realize that it was going to be this bad when I initially bought it. I then realized that this was gonna have an issue and it was just gonna overheat. So basically I got maybe 60 seconds of a file transfer done before the entire thing overheated and the drive just automatically shut down due to heat. But looking at the reviews and doing some more research on the issue, I found that other people also had the same problem, and people that were filmmakers like me had the same issue where it would actually fry their SSDs. Now, it didn't fry my SSD, fortunately. I don't think I used it long enough for that, but I should have took a picture of this, but my temperature gun, which I use on the outside of the enclosure and the heatsink, the outside of the enclosure was just as hot as the heatsink. It was 160 degrees and it was a little over 200 on the inside of the enclosure, which is way too hot for an SSD. Your SSD can absolutely not operate under those temperatures, properly. So after looking at this enclosure, I actually brought it to somebody I know who's an engineer, and he told me why this design was so bad and how he would design the entire thing differently, because it's a cool looking design. It's just not very efficient in terms of cooling. So I was looking for a different enclosure because I want to be able to do those 3.3 gigabyte per second transfers. That's the whole reason why I bought into this Thunderbolt 4 enclosure, which was like 60 or 70 bucks. I think I had a coupon that got it down to like 55, but still pretty pricey for what it is, especially if it's going to overheat and not work at all. I needed to look for another solution, so I'm going to tell you what to buy instead of this enclosure. Otherworld Computing manufactures a enclosure that I was seriously happy with. They make a model called the Express 1M2 that is basically the same as the other thing that you saw, that Orico SSD enclosure, except it's basically just a giant heatsink. So it is bigger, however, it doesn't overheat. So yes, it's a little bit bigger, it's a little bit heavier, but if it doesn't overheat and it actually works as intended, then it's supposed to. So I have it beside me here. They include a Thunderbolt 4 cable that will do 40 gigabits per second. They also gave it a feature of 240 watts, which I thought was pretty impressive. Not all cables are built like that. Like a lot of cables, similar to the one that was included with the other enclosure, is just 40 gigabits per second, so it doesn't actually do 240 watts of power. So I was really happy to see that. They just include that nice little short cable. It's also much more premium than this other cable was. I also didn't like that it had a USB-A attachment. It's great and convenient, but when I'm plugging this into my MacBook and I have to try to wipe this off to the side, this is scratching on the side of my MacBook, and it actually caused a little bit of a scratch on the side. Looking at the enclosure itself here, fantastic design, basically just a ginormous heatsink. It almost looks like an external SSD that you would buy from the store, like similar to, not quite the same, but almost like a T9, like it's got, light in the front. It's just that same like form factor, just kind of multiplied in size. But it's got an LED indicator here. It blinks for solid state drive activity, and then it's just on steady whenever it's just plugged in. Basically how this works is they include one rubber pad is already installed, and then the other rubber pad just sits on the top here, and then there's two screws under that. So they actually include a mini screwdriver in the box, which I thought was nice too. Nice little handy dandy screwdriver. But you unscrew those two screws, and then this just slides off similar to how the other enclosure did. And then you put your drive in. It actually already has thermal pads and everything installed. It even has a thermal pad for the media chip that's in there, which is great. It might not be a media chip, it's something else maybe. Already basically has everything done for you. All you have to do is pop your SSD in, just screw it in. It does have an actual screw that it comes with, and then put it back together, install the little rubber pad piece, and you get this. I'm much more happy with this enclosure than I was with that little Orico one. Like I said, yes, it's a little bit bigger, it's a little bit heavier, but it feels much more premium. You don't get that same plasticky sound that you got with the other enclosure. Now, to a lot of people, that kind of thing wouldn't really be a big deal, but to me it is, because this is the drive that I'm gonna carry with me for the next 5 years, and I'd rather not pick it up and have it sound like it's gonna disintegrate in my hands. So, buy this instead.